button, and we are waiting for the stream to get fired up. If you're not familiar, we broadcast all over the place. We broadcast on Facebook and on Twitter and on, of course, our home base of YouTube, and it looks like the stream is live across the board on all the different platforms. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney broadcasting to you live from our beautiful office here in Scottsdale, Arizona. You can see our sign back here, the R&R Law Group. My team and I, over the course of many years, we've helped thousands of people facing criminal charges, helped them through the justice system. And over the course of our time in practice, we've seen a lot of problems with the way that the justice system operates, how things are conducted. In particular, we see a lot of malfeasance from police officers, prosecutors, politicians, judges, basically anybody involved in the criminal justice system. There's sort of these little tentacles of injustice spreading throughout. And so we started this program called Watching the Watchers Live to monitor all of that, to watch those people, to make sure that they're being held accountable. And today we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into conspiracy law. We're going to be talking specifically about the Whitmer plot, the Governor Whitmer plot out of Michigan. You may have seen this story sort of percolating in the press over a certain period of time. Well, last week we had a court date, actually two court dates. The preliminary hearing was taking place for 5 of the co-defendants in the conspiracy against the governor. And so we've got some interesting things to talk about. Conspiracy is one of those areas of the law that is just super interesting. It's always been fascinating to me because it's pretty easy to get caught up into conspiracy. You can just say something, and before you know it, you're wrapped up into one of these really bad situations. And so today what we want to talk about is whether or not these plotters actually committed any crimes, right? It looks really bad. What we see on the news and what we see on the media, we see some, firearms, we see some explosions, and we hear a lot of pretty nasty language from these individuals who are saying things like they want to kill tyrants and so on and so forth. But is that criminal activity? And so what we're going to talk about today is specifically what happened in this situation. We're going to go through the criminal complaint that was actually submitted by the federal FBI, the agents who submitted the documents over to the attorney's office, the federal prosecutor's office. They're filing charges, and the court date for the preliminary hearing took place last week, and so we have a lot to get through. Now let's dive in. Let me make sure that the stream is working across the board, and I think that we are looking good. I want to thank everybody for being here. As a quick reminder, if you are not a regular subscriber here, hit the subscribe button because we do these deep dives pretty regularly. All right, and so let's get into some of the meat and potatoes of the program. So as you know, we have seen this story around in the news for some period of time. We're talking about Governor Whitmer. Governor Whitmer here is the governor of Michigan. She is the governor from the Democratic Party, and she is somebody who is a former prosecutor. She is basically an ex-lawyer before she ran for statewide office. She was a former prosecutor, which, we're not going to hold that against her. She is somebody who has been very, very vocally anti-Trump. She has said that on a number of different occasions. Her political positions are anti-Trump. She gave the State of the Union response in 2020, and it was pretty forceful. I remember actually watching it. She called for a national mask mandate, and you can see I referenced that article down here. And throughout the entire coronavirus, throughout this entire lockdown, quarantine situation, she has been very, very vocal in favor of lockdowns. And in fact, this is something that is actually still ongoing in the state of Michigan. And so what this story has sort of boiled over into is this divide that we're seeing in American culture between sort of the pro-lockdown people and the anti-lockdown people. And as is always the case, when there are people on both sides of an issue, what tends to happen is we start to see some sort of fringe radical activities on either side, right? You see a lot of the response to the criminal justice protests. BLM is, sort of the main, I would say, meat of that organization or of that movement, of that cause. But then on the end, you've got Antifa. You've got these radicals who are burning cities down. On the other side, you've got these individuals who are upset about lockdowns or upset about government orders requiring you not to go to the gym and wear a face mask and those things. Most people, I would say, are, sort of moderately compliant with a lot of those rules, but they're not particularly happy with those. And then on the fringe of that group, you're seeing some of these other organized militias and people who want to actually take out the government because they're feeling like these lockdown orders are infringing on some of their most fundamental privileges as Americans, their constitutional rights, their Bill of Rights. And so these different segments are percolating throughout American society. Now, I want to be very clear as we're going through this analysis that I do not condone any of this type of conduct. I don't condone any of this behavior. And really it is dangerous and quite frankly disturbing. We're going to look at a lot of disturbing language and a lot of disturbing threats. And I don't condone that, but the question that we want to get to here is whether or not this was criminal. And so we're going to go through this progression, and there's a couple things I want you to keep in mind as we are doing this analysis. But before we get there, let's lay some more foundation. Let's talk about why was this all even happening in the first place? Why are people so upset about these lockdown orders and about these mask mandates and about all of this sort of response to the coronavirus? Well, this has been going on in Michigan for some time. And I want to share with you an article from CNN that says the Michigan Supreme Court rules against the governor again, ending the COVID-19 executive order. So again, this is going against Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan. The Michigan Supreme Court on Monday, so this was last week, said that they're going to delay the effect, or they're going to deny Governor Whitmer's request to delay the effect of an opinion. So the court already came out and ruled 10 days ago that the Democrat has no authority to issue or renew executive orders related to COVID-19. So these orders have been in effect for a very long time in Michigan. Governor Whitmer wants to extend them. The court said, no, you can't do that. She said, well, hold on a minute. We need more time to allow for an orderly transition during which time some responsive measures can be placed under the alternative executive authority and so on and so on and so on. And the court basically just said, no, that's too bad. You don't have any authority to continue these extended lockdowns. They said, the order said, our decision today leaves open many avenues for our governor, which is Governor Whitmer, and the legislator to work together in a cooperative spirit and a constitutional manner to respond to COVID-19 in the appropriate manner. So she wants the lockdowns to continue. The courts came back and said, you can't do that. She said, we need more time. Please don't say I can't do that. Court came back and said, no, we're doubling down on it. You really can't do that. Go talk to the legislator, to your state Congress, to your different politicians, and get this thing worked out. So this has been going on for a long time. And so people are hot over this stuff. Okay, I've seen that in Arizona. I've seen it around the country. In my mind, a large part of the unrest, of the civil unease that many people are experiencing are a direct result of the lockdowns. People are losing their jobs. People are drinking more. People are dying more from suicide. Domestic violence calls are up across the country, here in our office as well. So the lockdown is having some pretty serious impact on people. And in my mind, I think it's translating into some mental health problems. I think that is even that's not even up for debate, I don't think. The national suicide hotlines are all, the calls were going up through the roof. I don't know if they're still that high, but there is a big mental health problem, I think, that is percolating right now. And we've said this, I've said this on this channel previously, but we were in the middle of a health crisis, the coronavirus viral crisis, but I think what we're doing is causing a mental health crisis that we're going to be dealing with for a very long time into the foreseeable future. And one of the places where the symptoms of that problem are showing up is in the criminal justice system. And I think a lot of it has to do with, well, we're going to dive into it. I think a lot of this activity that we're seeing from this group of individuals is probably being exacerbated by these lockdowns and by the feeling that people are sort of trapped under the government's burgeoning orders and just chains and shackles is how people feel. And so this has been going on in Michigan, and this sort of militia group called the Wolverine Watchmen started to bubble up. And we're talking about these individuals who are the alleged plotters. There are 5 of them, and here is who we have. So we have Caleb Franks, and they all have these little aliases, these nicknames that they go by, and we're going to follow through. They try to hide some of their communications as this plot is developing, but we have Caleb Franks, who's age 26. His nickname is Red Hot. We've got Daniel Harris, who goes by Beaker. He's the youngest of the group. He's age 23. We have Brandon Caserta. We're going to see a lot from him. He goes by the Debased Tyrant name, which is interesting given that he is in opposition to tyrants. We have Adam Dean Fox, who is the Alpha FU. He's age 37. And this guy really is sort of the ringleader of this group of individuals right here. We've got Ty Garbin, who goes by Gunny, and he's age 25. There are other individuals who are also wrapped up into this ordeal. There's another individual by the name of Barry Croft, who's 44. He was from Delaware, and so I think he has been actually transferred to Michigan, and he's facing pending criminal charges. And then there's a number of other people who are being charged with some lower level, I would say, state crimes, also for, kidnapping and doing things wrongfully. But the reason we're focusing on these 5 individuals is because this is taking place in a federal court, which is a little bit different than state court. And this is something where I think this is going to be sort of the flagpole. This is going to be the spotlight for this type of activity moving forward. I think this is going to be the case that the media will sort of pin their hat on, and they're going to follow this one along. So any of the other militia type of cases or any of these other anti-government protest cases are sort of going to be lumped into this category of offenses. And so this is taking place out of Michigan. This is known as the Whitmer plot, and it is actually a pretty interesting story. So let's run through it. So what is the big deal? What is the big problem with this? Well, we're seeing a lot of bad imagery, a lot of violent imagery, if you consider it to be that, right? Some people will look at an image like this and they'll say, oh my goodness, right? This is a horrific scene. This is somebody with an assault weapon. This is somebody with a weapon of war, as you can hear in the media. This is a weapon of murder. What do you need this for? Look at that extended magazine over here. Look at how he's holding this thing. It's certainly designed to kill, right? This is what you hear from the anti-government or the anti-gun people. This is just unnecessary. This should be banned. You should only be allowed to have weapons for hunting and all of that stuff. Whereas if you're a gun owner, if you're an enthusiast, if you believe in the Second Amendment, if you believe in the right to keep and bear arms, if you believe in the right to protect your family and that your home is a castle and all of those things, you look at an image like that and you just say, yeah, that's just a gun, right? It's not even a big deal. You may have one of those, okay? And so this is where the debate in this type of an argument or this type of conversation comes up. People are just immediately responsive one way or the other. And we're going to break this down a little bit further, but let's take a look at some of the other evidence that came out during the preliminary hearing, and we're going to see specifically some activity from these 5 men. So they're out what they call an FTX, called a field training exercise. And so the abbreviation they use is FTX. And here is a video of them out in a field somewhere, probably in Michigan, performing one of these FTXs. And so this is, again, how do you look at this? Is this training in preparation to go murder and kidnap a governor? Or is this just a group of guys who are out practicing with firearms? Let's take a look at what this video, and you can be the judge of that.
Bang, bang. Keep moving.
So you see there, it says at the bottom that this is taking place in the vacuum store basement. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. What we see here, it's just kind of guys with some firearms, just practicing their stuff. Now, he's practicing in a shirt and tie, which is interesting. This is a gun locker and, surrounding area. Many people have setups that look like this. Doesn't necessarily make it illegal, right? So we're going to open that up and see a bunch of guns. Now, I'm not having a commentary here on whether or not this guy's in violation of any firearms regulations. I'm not familiar with firearms laws in Michigan. Don't know how things are operating here. This guy might be a prohibited possessor. There are a number of things that could have been a problem with what we just saw there. But by and large, you can be in possession of a lot of firearms. You can have firearms as long as you're following your local and federal laws. Just that stuff alone is not by itself criminal. And in fact, this is what these 5 guys, this is what their attorneys are saying. Actually, one of their own attorneys, one of the defense attorneys, called their own clients crackheads or crackpots is what he said. So there's, the defense is starting to come to a consensus on what they want to present. This article came out on the 13th, so 5 days ago. It says that the defense says Governor Whitmer kidnap plot was just big talk between crackpots. It says that one of the defense attorneys says there was no real plan to kidnap the governor, but only a military wannabes who engaged in big talk and let me back up. Nope, sorry about that. Okay. So who engaged in big talk and played with guns in the woods, defense lawyers argued in federal court on Tuesday. As one defense lawyer suggested, the case appears to be one of big talk between crackpots, people who talk a lot but are never going to do anything. Have you ever dealt with big talkers? Defense attorney Scott Graham asked an FBI agent on cross-examination, adding, there's kind of a military wannabe theme that runs through the militias. So that's an interesting technique for a defense lawyer to call your clients crackpots. Not one that I would typically recommend, but I can see the move. I can understand that, right? You want to frame them as just a bunch of idiots who have no real intent of actually doing any of this stuff, but we'll see how that works out for them. So again, what is it, right? This is going to be open to a lot of interpretation. How do you characterize this? Was this really a volitional act? Was this really an attempt to go and kill Governor Whitmer? Or was this, like the defense attorneys just said, a bunch of crackpots? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the criminal complaint and we're going to kind of superimpose some of the stuff that happened at the preliminary hearing last week. I think it was Tuesday and Friday, which is when they were in court. So this is the actual criminal complaint. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. We're going to look at this specifically. You can see here that this was filed the United States District, U.S. of America in the Western District, Michigan Court. Adam Fox, Barry Croft, Ty Garbin, Caleb Franks, Daniel Harris, Brandon Caserta. Those are those 5 defendants. This is the criminal complaint. It says on or about the dates of June 2020 to the president in the county of Kent and elsewhere in the Western. This is what they did. They committed the offense of 18 U.S.C. 1201C, which is the conspiracy to commit kidnapping charge. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at that code. What does that say? What does 18 U.S.C. 1201C say? What is the actual law? And we're going to find that when we go to the federal code, it's a little bit wonky. It's kind of clear. You can't really understand exactly what it means. And what is a conspiracy? Can you leave a conspiracy? What happens if you want to withdraw from the conspiracy? What do you need to do in furtherance of that conspiracy? If it's just a bunch of, group of guys talking around like, hey, I hate the government, does that automatically put you into a conspiracy, or is something else required? Then once we understand what the rules are, we can start applying the facts to the rules, and we can say, all right, as these individuals were going through and sort of, preparing this plot, is there a moment in time where it changes from just sort of body, as Trump would say, locker room talk, just a bunch of group of guys pontificating about, some nonsense? When does it cross that line and become an actual overt act, which would then lead to some criminal liability? Does that happen? So let's go through it. Let's start up at the top, and we'll go to 18 U.S. Code 1201, which is the exact code that was referenced in the criminal complaint. And we can see here that a lot of this isn't really going to matter. It's going to say here that this is not talking about conspiracy yet, but it is saying specifically about kidnapping, a person who unlawfully seizes, confines, blah, 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 kidnaps, abducts, carries away any other person, except in the case of a minor, and it goes through all of these different things, right? A lot of this is not applicable here. Maritime, territorial jurisdiction, no. Special aircraft jurisdiction, no. Foreign official, no. The person is an employee. Yeah, it's a U.S. employee, but not really particularly relevant. If you recall, they actually are going to charge these guys under subsection C. But I wanted you to see how far down this was, because when we're talking about this statute, this is the kidnapping statute. This entire thing is kidnapping. But when we get down to the provision that is just applicable to these individuals at this stage in the case, we're going to see this is all that we're really talking about here. It says if 2 or more persons conspire to violate this section and 1 or more of such person does any overt act, okay, this is why this is highlighted, an overt act to effect the object of the conspiracy. So this means that they have to do something in furtherance of the conspiracy. If they do that, then that's enough. Each shall be punished by imprisonment for any term of years or for life. And it goes on a little bit further, right? This subsection here, subsection B, is basically saying that if you take somebody into custody and you don't release them within 24 hours, it creates this rebuttable presumption that the person has been transported or been put into interstate or foreign commerce. We're going to get back to that in a minute, but I did want to share this with you, right? This is super important because we're going to spend a lot of the rest of this video talking about was what these people did. Was it an overt act? Was it just talk? Or was it a specific act in furtherance of the conspiracy to affect the object of the conspiracy? And so it's not even saying in furtherance. It's saying if it just affects the object of the conspiracy, what does that mean? Oh my gosh, that is such a generic term, right? So we're going to have to dive into that a little bit further. And fortunately, I've already done that. We have some case law that we're going to talk about here shortly. But before we do that, let's go to the general kidnapping a federal statute that talks about conspiracy. This is what it looks like. It says, if two or more persons conspire either to commit any offense against the U.S. or to defraud the United States or any agency thereof for any purpose, one or more such persons does any act to affect the object of the conspiracy. What does that look like? It looks like exactly like the other conspiracy statute that's in the kidnapping provision. And so now we need to talk about, and I know this is some technical law stuff, I appreciate you bearing with me on it, but what we're talking about is what does that mean? What does that statute mean? Because if any two people do something and that affects the final object of the conspiracy, can you be charged with a conspiracy for that, right? If you and your friend are sitting there and you say, hey, we should go get some ice cream. Are you in a conspiracy to go get ice cream at that point? Or does it require you to actually take out your keys, go sit in your car, turn it on, and start driving to the ice cream store? If that's the overt act, or is the overt act lesser than that? Or are there many, many degrees in there? What if you go and you tell your spouse, hey, me and Johnny, we're going to go to the ice cream store. You just told Johnny about that. And so are they in that conspiracy? This is, kind of a ridiculous example, but just think about that. What's going to need to happen from one activity to the next in order for that conspiracy to be considered valid and lead to criminal liability? That's what we want to get to. So let's dive into the statute a little bit. Let's see what it means when we're talking about this concept of an overt act. That is, if you've had a conversation with somebody, you're agreeing that you're going to go to the ice cream store, what activity, what is that overt action that's going to lead to that act in furtherance, that's going to affect the outcome of the conspiracy? And so here is what some of the case law says. It says that the overt act need not be the substantive crime, which is the object of the conspiracy, an element of that offense, or even a crime in its own right. So it does not need to be the actual crime. It does not need to be an element of the crime. And it doesn't even need to be a crime in its own right. So think about this like in a bank robbery example. If there's a group of guys, 4 guys who are going to go rob a bank, they all agree to do it. Nobody gets in the car, but one guy goes and he buys, let's say, 4 ski masks in order to cover and conceal their identities as they go in to rob the bank. No bank robbery has happened, haven't even driven to the bank yet. None of that has taken place, but they put that mask on. Buying a ski mask is not illegal. Buying a ski mask doesn't mean that you're going to go rob a bank. It has nothing to do with that. It's not illegal on its own. It's not necessary. It's not an element of a crime of robbing the bank. You don't have to have a ski mask to go rob a bank. You can do one without one. So if that's the situation, is that an act in furtherance? Think about it that way. Another part of the rule, the overt act need not be the substantive crime. Actually, that's the same one. I copied and pasted that twice. So we'll move on to conspiracy. So conspiracy is the other part of this analysis that we need to talk about. Withdrawal. What happens if you're going to go rob that bank and you decide this is not such a good idea? I want to withdraw from that endeavor. I don't want to be a part of this conspiracy anymore. What needs to happen? It's very specific. You can't just not go rob the bank and just stay home that morning. You might still be a part of that conspiracy even if you just overslept. So let's take a look at some of these rules. It says a defendant's membership in the conspiracy and his responsibility for its acts endures even if he is entirely inactive after joining it. So you could say, yep, I want to go be a part of that bank robbery. And if they go and rob the bank and you did nothing else at all, you might still be considered to be a part of the conspiracy, even if you're entirely inactive. Another part of the rule, members of a conspiracy members of a conspiracy have had a disagreement or falling out is not sufficient to establish withdrawal. So it needs to be more specific. So if you and these 4 people who are going to go rob the bank, you get into a fight and the group breaks up, but then 2 or 3 members of that group go rob the bank, just because the group broke up, you had a disagreement or falling out, doesn't mean that you're removed from the conspiracy. Arrest, even if you're part of that bank robbery and you get arrested, doesn't mean you've withdrawn from the conspiracy. Arrest without more does not indicate withdrawal. And finally, to withdraw, the conspirator must act affirmatively, either to defeat or disavow the purposes of the conspiracy. So it needs to be a lot, right? And we're going to see a lot of that as we go through this criminal complaint. You're going to hear a lot of conversations that take place between these 5 guys. Does it sound like a withdrawal? Are they actually removing themselves from the conspiracy, or are they not? Are they just sort of riding along with it? Well, let's dive into it. So before we do, I want to talk to you a little bit about what a preliminary hearing is. This is a scene from the preliminary hearing, which took place last week. I think it was Tuesday and Friday. Doesn't look like photographs were allowed in, but there was an artist rendering. And so we see some images of some different weapons and some different evidence that was presented. So let's just back up a little bit and talk about what a preliminary hearing is. When you're charged with a crime, many people are used to hearing that phrase called, you got to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, right? It's the highest standard that we have in law. It means the government has a really big burden. They have to show that you're guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. That means even if there's a doubt and it's based in reason, it's reasonable, you're not guilty of that offense. And that's not what we're talking about right here. That's usually what you see in the movies when it's a big final trial, everything sort of culminating up to this big climax point in the film or whatever the TV show is, and they have a trial, and that's really it. What we're talking about here with the preliminary hearing is a much lower level, very important type of proceeding, but the rules are a little bit different. So rather than having to prove somebody's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, we have to prove a much lower standard. The government has to prove a much lower standard. Essentially, all they have to do is show that there's enough probable cause to bring the charges against those people. So here, there's enough evidence to support the charge. Okay, so the government just can't say, hey, we think that you murdered somebody, and we're just going to arrest you, and we're just going to throw you in jail for the next 12 months, and we're just going to get to a trial when we want a trial, right? That would be depriving you of your due process. You have a right to due process. You have a right to have certain hearings. Your freedom is being limited. Your liberty is being held, and now you want to have some sort of recourse against that. So in addition to being afforded the right to have a trial by jury, you also have a right to really have a preliminary hearing to prove that there's enough evidence, there's enough probable cause to even bring the charges against you. So not that you're guilty, but that the proceedings, the process shouldn't even begin. It's kind of a strange concept for a lot of people to think about, but before the government can even formally file charges against you, you have some due process rights, because if they do file charges and it moves forward, you can be held in custody pending the proceedings. You can be in custody for months and months on end. So there is some due process, and that's what takes place at a preliminary hearing. So preliminary, they're much, I would say, less evidentiary based. In other words, the defense, the prosecutor's office has a lot more leeway in some of the evidence that they can bring in. There are certain rules of evidence that aren't applicable. They can talk about a lot more things that they may not be able to talk about at trial, because all they're trying to do is just meet that much lower probable cause standard. And in many cases, they don't even have preliminary hearings. A lot of the time, preliminary hearings are just waived by the defendant. They just say, yeah, we agree there's enough evidence to bring the charges, but we don't agree that there's enough evidence to convict us of the charges. And so they will then just waive the right to have that hearing and challenge the probable cause, saying that they're going to fight the case later on down the road. This is a lot of technical kind of defense stuff, but I do think that it is important to understand what happened here. The reason why it's important is because there is a lot of evidence that's presented. Both sides can present evidence. The prosecutors can present evidence. The defense can cross-examine witnesses. The defense can present their own evidence. So it's sort of like a mini trial. We got to see a lot of stuff that took place at this preliminary hearing that you wouldn't see if this were done by a grand jury indictment, for example. So remember the Breonna Taylor grand jury indictment? We almost know nothing about what happened there until the public was so outraged that they went over to Daniel Cameron and they demanded that he start releasing transcripts and all this stuff. And even then, he released just sort of, haphazard transcripts, stuff that was incomplete and sort of cherry picked. And so we got a lot more of a full picture here when we're talking about this preliminary hearing. And so what they did is they filed the criminal complaint, they set it for a preliminary hearing, and what ended up happening is the judge found that there was enough probable cause to move this thing forward and to hold them over pending a different indictment. So in other words, I think what's going to happen is they're going to get charged with a lot more stuff. You just saw, I showed you the copy of the criminal complaint, which only had the one charge, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. I think that's really just to hold them, to get a hold of them, and then they're going to actually indict them on a whole slew of other charges. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about what actually took place in the complaint. So when we go over to it, and this is all public record, you can find this stuff anywhere that you look for it, but it says it's a continuation of the criminal complaint. It says, so Richard Trask, this is the individual who is a special agent with the FBI. He's been with them since April 2011, participated in domestic terrorism, counterterrorism, counterintelligence programs, espionage, so on and so forth. He's participated in getting search warrants, seizing evidence, telephone providers, electronic devices, all of that stuff. And so he writes this complaint, and follow along with me as we go through this. And we're going to see here there's a number of different paragraphs. And so I skipped paragraph 1, but I want to talk about 2 and 3 because it says here that what they're trying to do is prove this probable cause. Okay. He says it does not set forth all my knowledge about this matter. There's a lot more information, I'm sure of it, that exists out there, but he doesn't need to submit it all right now, because the only thing we're talking about right now is whether there was enough probable cause to move this thing forward. Then we go into the second complaint. So why is this case in federal court? Why? Why is this different than state court? Well, because what we have right here is this concept of interstate commerce. If you're doing things that cross state lines, then it's going to basically mean that you're engaging in interstate commerce. And what entity governs that? The federal government does. That's why we have a national government and local state governments. And so when I first saw this, I was thinking, well, why is this in federal court? That's kind of interesting because, a lot of this stuff can take place in state court. If you threaten a public figure, if you do those types of things, you can be charged with threatening and intimidating and all sorts of different offenses on a local state level. So why was this crossing state lines? Well, it's because of the fact that they were using the internet, and the FBI agent talks about that specifically. He says they were using means of interstate commerce such as cellular telephones or the internet in actually trying to move this conspiracy forward. And the reason why this took place is because these 5 guys were actually using Facebook. They actually had a private Facebook group, and they were communicating with each other in that group. So their information, their communication needed to go to Facebook servers, which are national servers, needed to be stored in their servers, or then were disseminated to other individuals who were part of the group and other individuals who have different militia groups. And so they were clearly using a national company and a national tool to coordinate their militia activities, which then moves it into interstate commerce. That brings the feds in, that brings the FBI in, that makes it a federal case, which is now taking place in federal court. And we're going to see a lot of this, okay? I do not endorse or condone any criminality. Because I'm a defense attorney, doesn't mean I support criminal behavior. That's ridiculous. But if you're going to be doing any criminal things, don't do them on public Facebook groups or even private Facebook groups, because they're not private. They're Facebooks. And the federal government, the FBI, just goes and says, hey, we want that, and they get it. So we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of kind of not too wise decisions that were being made by these individuals as they were going through developing this plot. Let's go back to the criminal complaint. We're going to see here that there were actually a lot of confidential informants. So not only were they using Facebook and those things to communicate with these things that were being monitored by the FBI, but they also had confidential human sources, which are called CHSs, and they also had some undercover employees who were also a part of this investigation. So they had 4 people in total, 1, 2, 3, and 4, CHS1, CHS2, UCE1, UCE2. These are 4 different people. These are confidential human sources. These are undercover employees. These are, basically undercover cops for the FBI who are infiltrating these groups. None of the CHSs were aware of the other CHSs. So we had these 2 CHS people, these confidential human sources, who were independent of one another. So CHS1 didn't even know CHS2. And so what the FBI was able to do is actually flip 2 people from within the groups to have them be confidential informants, and they wouldn't even know about each other. So then the FBI could corroborate their information. If number 1 came and said that X, Y, and Z happened, and number 2 was there, they can look at number 2's report or his testimony and say, yeah, they match pretty good. And so they were able to tell, who was playing ball and who wasn't. They also had undercover informants who were actual FBI employees who were also brought into the group. And so they had this group under surveillance from every which way, from every single angle. And it's kind of amusing, actually, how deeply invested they were into this group. And the group just had no idea about it. All right. Let's move on. So we go through and we're going to see that the actual conspiracy starts in early 2020. Early 2020, the FBI became aware of social media, and there were individuals discussing the violent overthrow of certain government and law enforcement components, okay? And this is where it starts, right? Social media, we see a lot of this. I was just watching, what movie was I watching? It was The Boys on Amazon. There's that TV show. And there's a scene in there where one of, just a regular everyday guy sort of, on social media all day long. He's getting this constant bombardment from the news, from the media about that superheroes are bad. He acts, at some point goes insane and goes and shoots the superhero. And, that's fiction, but it's kind of a commentary on what a lot of people think is happening right now, that a lot of people are getting indoctrinated on both sides of the aisle, whether it's Antifa, whether it's, right-wing militias, that people are listening to a lot of the media, a lot of the toxicity that is being emanated from every single microphone and speaker that will broadcast it. And it's radicalizing people. It's escalating the temperature in the room, and it's becoming a problem. And so that's how this all was starting. It's happened on social media, and the FBI caught wind of it and started monitoring it. Croft and Fox agreed to unite others in their cause and take violent action against multiple state governments that they believe are violating the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to get into the conversation, right? Can you just talk about these things? What if you're just sitting around a group of guys and you're just talking about it? It could be a violent overthrow of the government. It could say, hey, there's a lot of tyrants out there. Many people would make the argument that, hey, the founding fathers of the United States were sitting around somewhere and said, hey, we got to overthrow these redcoats. Okay, we got to overthrow the British. How could they have that conversation if just sitting around and having the conversation itself would have been criminal? And so a big part of American law really, really protects freedom of speech. We know that. It's the First Amendment. There's in books and case laws, and the legal history on freedom of speech is so voluminous that it's hard to even describe. But it's that important. And so when we start to say that you can't even have those conversations, people get really concerned about that. So is that alone, just sitting around talking about the violent overthrow of government, illegal? Well, not under the statute that we just read, right? It said an overt act. Remember the conspiracy statute? It said overt act. They need to do something to affect the ultimate disposition of the conspiracy. So this alone, to me, doesn't sound like it would meet that standard. And we're going to see that pattern for a little bit. When we go on, it says that at one point, several members talked about state governments they believe were violating the Constitution. They talked about Michigan. They talked about Gretchen Whitmer. They talked about murdering tyrants. They talked about taking a sitting governor. Wow, okay. They talked about they needed to increase their numbers. They encouraged each other to talk to their neighbors, spread their message. They wanted to recruit people. They reached out to this group called the Militia Group, which is another organization. So now you're starting to think, okay, it's a little bit more than just talk, right? This is starting to look like they're now recruiting people, and they're sort of extending this conversation. So on the one side, you might say, still talk though. They haven't done anything to move that conspiracy further. They're allowed to talk. We have freedom of association, freedom to assemble. Maybe they're just Maybe this is just more communication. And remember, the freedom of assembly is also in the First Amendment. It's sort of part and parcel of free speech. You can't have free speech if you can't get with people to talk to them, right? So this is all being lumped into that same broad category. But did they do anything that was an overt act? Are they moving the ball forward in the conspiracy to kidnap or to kill Governor Whitmer? Are we there yet? I'll leave this for you to decide, but I'll keep asking the question as we go through it. So here they're talking about specifically murdering tyrants, taking a sitting governor. We move on in the complaint. We'll see that the FBI was able to monitor a lot of the activity because they were these confidential informants were continuously recording phone calls, monitoring everybody. And then at one point in June 14th, Fox, who is the ringleader of this whole thing, said that he needed 200 men to storm the Capitol building in Lansing, Michigan. He needed to take hostages, including the governor. He explained that he would try the governor of Michigan for treason and he would execute the plan before the November 2020 elections. Okay, so two ways to read this, right? He's going to execute the plan before 2020. So then you could say, well, the plan hasn't started. He hasn't executed anything, right? He's talking about getting the pieces in place in order to execute the plan. So by the government's own admission, is this the beginning of the conspiracy? If they're still just talking about it, is this yet the conspiracy? Is this an act in furtherance? Or by the opposing reading, you would say, yeah, they set a date. They set a date before November 2020. That's coming up. They're talking about this in June, and the elections are just a couple months away. So now we've got a deadline. They set a deadline in place. So maybe that is the overt act. But a lot of this stuff is going to be open for interpretation. So again, you have to ask yourself, did it tip that line? Is this still free speech, protected speech, or have we crossed the Rubicon? Are we now in this is criminality territory because we have an end date? And remember, we're only on paragraph 11. There's a lot more to go. So let's dive into paragraph 12. So here's what we have. We see that on June 20th, so about a week later, there's a number of individuals, including the two confidential informants. They meet at Grand Rapids. They go to Fox's operational security. So this is where it kind of gets funny, right? The attendees, they meet in the basement of the shop. They have to access it through a trap door hidden under a rug. Fox, who's the ringleader, collects all of their cell phones. He puts them in a box. He carries them upstairs to prevent any monitoring. Well, unfortunately, one of the confidential informants was wearing a recording device, and it captured all of the audio from the meeting. The attendees discussed the plans for assaulting the state capitol, countering law enforcement, first responders, and using Molotov cocktails to destroy police vehicles. They also discussed plans for an additional meeting during the first weekend of July, which they would conduct firearms and tactical training. So the first thing, right, is a big whoops on that. If you're going to confiscate everybody's cell phones and take them up out of the basement in your secret bunker, you probably want to check for some other recording devices. There are these little spy things you can get on Amazon that will actually show you some of that. It's inexpensive, $80. But they didn't do that. They just took everybody's cell phone, ran them upstairs. Meanwhile, the whole thing was recording, and the FBI got a copy of all of the audio. But what were they doing? Well, they were just talking again, right? It was more talk. They were all sitting around in a bunker. They're talking about firearms training, tactical training. They're talking about Molotov cocktails. They're talking about destroying police vehicles. They're doing a lot of talking. Sounds really bad, really disturbing behavior, right? I don't sit around and talk about those types of things with my friends. I don't know if you do, probably not. But what we're talking about here is, disturbing content, disturbing ideas, disturbing concepts. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily illegal, because you have to go back to the law. I didn't write the law. Does it say overt act? Is it moving this further? Is it moving the conspiracy further? You could argue yes, right? You absolutely could make the argument that they're talking about planning, they're setting dates, they're talking about weapons, they're talking about Molotov cocktails, they're talking about destroying the police, they're setting in place plans to talk about first responders. And so you could say that act of communicating about those things is an act in furtherance. But you could also just say it's just talk, and it may require a little bit more. let's keep going through the complaint. We get over to paragraph 13. We're going to see that on June 25th, Fox live streamed a video. So we have a whole separate incident, a different date. We have a new live stream. It goes over to a Facebook group that includes the confidential informant. He complained about the judicial system. I do that all the time. The state of Michigan, I don't do that. Fox referred to the governor as this tyrant bee. I don't know, boys. We got to do something. You guys link me with me on our other location system. Give me some ideas of what we can do. This video was preserved by the FBI. So again, is this an overt act or is he just talking? I don't know, boys. We got to do something. You guys link with me on the other location. Give me some ideas of what we can do. Right? That one sounds even less like an overt act. It sounds like there's less plans in place, like there's less activity. They're just talking. They're just brainstorming. They're just throwing ideas around. They're using a private Facebook group to do it. They're using the internet, all of that stuff. But is this evidence of a conspiracy to kidnap? This one paragraph by itself, is it? No, it's just talk. He's just looking for ideas. But then we start to go down a little bit further, and let's see what we find. We go over, there's more evidence of communication here. So this was one of the actual text messages that came out during the preliminary hearings. This guy says, laying in bed, craziest idea. Have one person go to her house. He's talking about Governor Whitmer. Knock on the door, and when she answers it, just cap her. At this point, F it. LOL, only if it would be that easy. Let me show you the text now. Laying in bed, craziest idea. Have one person go to her house, knock on the door, and when she answers it, just cap her. At this point, F it. LOL. Only if it would be that easy. Okay? Right? Very disturbing. Horrible thought. But is this talk or is this action? This is just talk. Right? This is just talk. It's just text messages. People say this stuff all the time in text messages. People say all the time, man, I wish he was dead. Remember how many people were saying this about Donald Trump when he got coronavirus? My Twitter feed was filled with people wishing he was dead. But that doesn't mean that they really wish he was dead. It's just talk. They're not part of a conspiracy to kill him. It's just talk. And that's what this looks like to me. Now, is it gross? Yeah. Is it disturbing? Yes. Is it something I would ever say? No, of course not. But is it criminal? Not from what we have seen as charged. But we slowly start to cross that line. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. All right. And watch how this criminal complaint is drafted. So it's laying the framework, and then we slowly start to cross the line. We're just taking a slow walk over from this is just gross, disturbing conversation to, yeah, all right, now we're starting to see some activity going on. And it starts on June 28th. So Fox's girlfriend, Garbin, Michigan resident Caleb Franks, Michigan resident Brandon Caserta, CHS, they attended a tactical training at Munith, Michigan, who was the residence of a pro-militia group member. After the training, Franks left the residence. So Franks is now gone. Other people, Fox, Garbin, Caserta, undercover informant, they remained at the residence, and they were told to leave if they were not willing to participate in attacks against the government. They were told to leave. Okay, pretty important. And if they were not going to participate, Fox, Garbin, Caserta, CHS stayed for the rest of the evening. All right, there, I think, is the first act. Right, this was the meeting that took place where they were saying, Now we're planning on this. Now we're really sitting down and we're putting pen to paper and we're going to execute this plan. This is the purpose of the meeting, is to start the planning. And if you don't want to be a part of it, now's your time to bail. And the people who stayed, they took an act at this point in furtherance of that conspiracy. And it's going to continue to sort of spiral from here. But let's go back and you'll see here, Franks left before the end of the night, though his departure does not appear to be related to Franks' commitment to the conspiracy. There's a subnote here that basically said Franks was upset that he left and he wanted to still be a part of the conspiracy. So all of these people stayed, and I think that was their first real overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. We go on to the next paragraph. This is where it becomes even more clear that they were now moving this conspiracy forward in my reading. Daytime surveillance, August 29th. So remember, we back up June 28th. They have the conversation. They stayed for the rest of the meeting. We have these people who are now sort of voluntarily associating themselves with this conspiracy. About a month later, CHS and another individual conducted surveillance of the vacation home. So remember, we go from 14 here over to 25. In a lot of that those other paragraphs, we're talking about just a lot of conversation, a lot of firearms training, a lot of back and forth between them, which ultimately culminated on a month later, August 29th. They actually conduct the surveillance of the vacation home. They provide an audio recording of the operation. He used his cell phone to locate the residence, had trouble finding it, contacted a friend, whatever. Fox and the other individuals locate the vacation home. They took photographs and slow motion video from their vehicle as they drove by it. They discussed conducting additional surveillance. Police in the area, we ain't going to let them burn our effing state down. I don't give an F if there's only 20 or 30 of us, dude. We're going to go down there and we're going to use deadly force, right? Now, this is where that line, I think, is clearly crossed, right? The conversation alone, that I don't give a F if there's only 20 or 30 of us, that's not criminal. But now when you're combining that with this act of actually going and surveilling the property, taking photographs, doing slow motion video, that is that act. That is what constitutes that element of the offense, which I think is going to lead them to the criminal liability. And it doesn't just stop right there. It continues on, right? It goes further. Here we see Adam Fox, who is the ringleader of the group again, actually drawing a map. So they were very well documenting everything that they were doing. All of these different guys were recording this stuff. There's recordings from basically everything. And you can see in that video that I played previously that they were all standing around their little shooting range and they were all filming each other. I mean, all of this stuff was very highly documented and they were supporting one another. They had this sort of ongoing rally in these private Facebook groups where they would share their content and talk about how much they hated the government. And so now they're actually drawing maps showing the area surrounding Governor Whitmer's vacation home in northern Michigan. So they decided that that's what they wanted to focus on, this vacation home. We have more surveillance that takes place. So we go from August 29th over to September 12th, September 13th, weekend of September 12th and 13th. Again, the same individuals, confidential human source and an undercover employee attended a field training exercise at Garbin's property in Michigan. It's located an hour and a half from the vacation home. Why is that important? Well, it's far. If they're doing a field training exercise at this property and the location is an hour and a half away, then when they actually go to the meeting, we know that they were intending to do that they had to drive an hour and a half to go actually visit this site. They weren't just swinging by, right? They weren't just, I'm going on my way home and I'm going to just stop off by Governor Whitmer's vacation house. That's not what happened. They were at a location that was an hour and a half away and they specifically drove over to the governor's residence. That's a volitional act. That's an overt act. They're making a lot of effort to go into this surveillance. And we can see here that Fox, who again is the ringleader, he selected these individuals, including the confidential informants, and 4 other people to conduct a nighttime surveillance of the vacation home in preparation for the kidnapping. During the late night of September 12th, the group drove from Luther, again, an hour and a half, to the vicinity of the vacation home in 3 separate vehicles. Oh, there it is, right? At that point in time, you can't say that this is not action anymore. This is more than just talk. They're drawing maps. They're doing daytime surveillance. They're doing nighttime surveillance. They're driving an hour and a half away. They got 3 separate vehicles with something like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people who are going and conducting basically these reconnaissance missions of the governor's residence. And so now the scale tips, right? It goes from all talk to a lot of action. And that, I think, is what is going to be required in order to show that they're criminally liable for these things. We go over to paragraph 35. It says, during the ride back to Garbin's property, we're doing all the reconnaissance work, right? So it should go smooth. And he gives them this opportunity to actually withdraw from this conspiracy. Remember what I was talking about withdrawing? He says again, the first time that he gave them the opportunity was when they had their initial meeting, when he said, hey, if you don't want to stay, if you don't want to be a part of this thing, now's the time to bail. He gives them another opportunity here. He says, if you're not down with the thought of kidnapping, don't sit here. He gives them an opportunity to bail. And none of them do. He says, oh no, we're not kidnapping. That's not what we're doing. We are not kidnapping children. We're adult napping. And they're all laughing. Kidnapping, arson, death, I don't care. And the group started discussing and destroying the vacation home. So clearly a little bit more than talk. They're literally driving back from the property, doing their surveillance missions. On September 30th, we have another conversation about discussing purchasing a taser. So we have on September 30th, the discussion about purchasing a taser. A couple days later, on October 2nd, Fox confirmed that he purchased an 800,000 volt taser, right? That is exactly the bank robbery analysis. 4 guys going to go rob a bank. 1 guy goes and buys 4 ski masks. That's preparation. That's in anticipation of committing the bank robbery. Same here. A group of guys talking about kidnapping and tasing the governor. 1 guy goes out, picks up a taser. That's an act in furtherance of that conspiracy. And basically from here on out, the scale has been tipped. It's not looking good for these 5 individuals. On September 17th, an encrypted group chat goes out, asks the group to participate. And again, they're sort of doing more preparation by not participating in other things that they would be doing. So they're foregoing taking certain actions. So they're asking if they want to participate in an armed protest. So ordinarily, they were thinking that they would go and participate in this armed protest. Garvin, who's part of the conspiracy up here, says, I would highly advise minimizing any communication with him. Also, there needs to be zero, and I mean zero public interaction if we want to continue with our plans. Caserta says, when the time comes, there will be no need to try to strike fear through presence. It'll be manifested through bullets. Fox responds, copy that, boys, loud and clear. So Garvin says, yeah, ordinarily we'd want to go and participate in this thing, but because we're getting so close to to executing this plan that you shouldn't communicate with them. Everybody agrees. They say, copy that, boys, loud and clear. That's right. We're not going to need to be there because we're just going to shoot everybody. And that is pretty clearly an action, right? Foregoing something that you would ordinarily do is an action. If normally you'd be going to work, but you're not going to go to work because you're going to go kidnap the governor, by not participating in that thing that you would ordinarily do, many people would read that as an overt act. If you're going to work, you can't go kidnap the governor. So therefore, by not going to work, that frees up your time to go kidnap the governor. Sort of like what we're talking about here. All right, so we can see sort of in this progression that it goes from a lot of really bad talk to some pretty bad actions in preparation, in anticipation of actually going through and committing this conspiracy. What did the defense attorneys say, though? Because we know that one of them said that they were a bunch of crackpots. Let's hear from some of the others and see if there's anything else we can gather.
To review the evidence, and until then, he's presumed not guilty, and that's the way he'll stay.
But we've only heard so far one side, tapes, audio, and photos. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that a couple of my co-counsel made good points that it's a snapshot of a lot of big time frame, and you don't know what else is happening outside of that time frame. So I'm sure part of our investigation that we conduct ourselves, and not relying solely on the federal government to tell us what happened, we'll try and round out that information to figure out what happened in the other times that weren't captured on tape, that weren't captured in text, to put it in a fuller context so that we can better assess where we stand in the case.
Gary, what was he like when you were with him today?
Yeah, and so this defense attorney he's on the mark, right? What we see in that complaint, what we see from the federal government is entirely one-sided. It's the FBI's reports. It's anybody else who was involved. It's the confidential informants reports. A lot of it is actually going to be the testimony and the statements, not the testimony, but the recordings, the postings, the social media profiles, all of the text messages that were seized on all these different phones. A lot of is going to be evidence. But the big question is going to be whether or not that evidence actually details a fuller picture. So when we were going through the criminal withdrawal statute for the conspiracy charge under U.S. Code, one of the points that I wanted to touch on, I think I missed, was about withdrawing. And so if you actually do want to withdraw from a conspiracy, one of the ways that you can do that is by affirmatively telling everybody about it, right? Hey, I am no longer a part of this thing. I am disavowing, and I'm going to the cops about that, right? That would be a pretty strong withdrawal. If you said, yeah, this is what's going on. I was a part of it, but I'm not a part of it anymore, and I'm actually withdrawing from it. Can that person still be charged with a conspiracy? No, because they withdrew from the entire conspiracy. So is there any other evidence that any of these other individuals, now I think there's 14 in total, did any of them actually withdraw from this thing? Was there any other conversations here that would put a lot of this stuff in context? Were they joking about this? Was this a fantasy? Were they just, using this as sort of a caricature for, practice, as disturbing, as gross as that may be? Is this, exercises, right? The military does war games and all sorts of exercises, and police do exercises. Individuals can do their own versions of exercise, right? What if they really are planning for the day when a tyrant tries to overthrow the country or something like that, right? I'm not trying to make excuses for these guys, but is the full picture, is the full story, is it going to reveal anything more that might be useful in pushing back against the narrative that was drafted by the federal government, right? Just because they put it in a criminal complaint, just because an FBI agent who has a lot of background is probably highly credentialed and all this stuff, just because he wrote it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I've read a lot of police reports that are filled with inaccuracies and sometimes downright lies. So just because it's a government document and because it's been filed in court doesn't mean that it is gospel and that we need to take it for its face value. There's a lot of problems with it. I can't tell you how many times I've shown our clients a version of what the police write in their report, and our clients who were there, we weren't there, they'll say, that never happened. I never said that. That cop is a total liar. And unfortunately, a lot of the times there's no evidence to counteract that, right? Either the police don't have body cameras, our clients don't have surveillance footage, nobody was recording this on a cell phone or anything like that. And if there's no evidence to rebut it, it's a pretty hard thing to do. So, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I'm certainly not going to be taking the word of the federal government on this situation. But if it is true, and the amount of evidence that the federal government has, the amount of access that they had to all of these different people, they had 2 confidential informants, they had 2 undercover agents who were working and sort of infiltrating these militia groups, and a lot of what they were doing was gross, and it really was more than just talk. They were taking actions in furtherance of committing an offense. Whether they were going to do it or not, who knows? Who knows? Maybe they would have. Maybe they wouldn't have. But the way that our law works is we're gonna give you a lot of leeway if it's just talk. We'll give you a lot of room on that. But as soon as you take that overt act, and remember, it doesn't have to be an overt act from all of the people in the conspiracy. In other words, if we go back to the bank robbery example, you don't need all 4 of those guys to go buy ski masks for their face. You just need one guy to do it. If that activity was in furtherance of that conspiracy, they're all a part of the conspiracy and they're all culpable for that criminal liability. So what do you think is the real question? Do you think that this is criminal activity? I think the law is pretty clear on that, but that doesn't mean anything. The law is a fickle beast, as they say. So let's hop on over to the chat. Now, listen, before we get to the chat, what I normally will do is I will say, hey, let's warm up those fingers on the keyboard by saying hi, Faith, because Faith is usually here helping me with this program, but she's not here today. Actually, she's not going to be here today or tomorrow or Wednesday, which is very disappointing. So I hope she's enjoying herself. Let's get to the chat anyways. Hey, everybody, what do you think about this Whitmer plot? Do you think that this is criminal conduct? Let me hop on over to the chat room and let's turn it up so that we can see what everybody has to say. Wow, we got a lot of people here. So grateful that you're here. All right, let me get situated and catch my breath a little bit. All right, RAS Illusion says, hi, Faith. Well, enjoy the time off. Yo, Faith. Yeah, Gigi says, I'm usually anti-government, but this seems like a clear and cut case. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think it's pretty cut and dry. I think these guys were over the line, and it's not okay, right? We don't want to support that at all. So I don't think there's really any justification for it. I think if it's a lot of talk, I would totally disagree with the talk, but I would protect their right to say it. But as soon as they started doing the surveillance, as soon as they started having these very serious meetings, putting some hard dates in the line, it crosses, right? It just crosses the boundary. And think about this from an enforcement perspective. What if we overly protected free speech and said we can't do anything unless it requires an even more overt act? Like, what's it going to require? Does it require them driving onto her property? Does it require them to actually pull a gun out? Like that's too far in the other direction. So I think this is kind of a fair balance. Quite frankly, I think that the government gave them a lot of leeway. We see here that this actually they only got arrested, and this whole case started to unfold in October. So they would let these guys just go and go and go for quite a while. I think they've got plenty of evidence. I think this is going to be a very hard case for the defense. RAS Illusion with an interesting idea says, I think this plot was set up from the jump, meant to control the narrative of the Hunter Biden story. Interesting. 2 crimes. They planned a kidnapping. They didn't realize that the FBI would be involved. Yeah, this group was really, really unwise with how they handled this whole thing. The FBI was just they had every single angle covered. They were basically filming a reality TV show about kidnapping the governor, and they put it all over Facebook. They were texting each other in group chats. They actually, if you read the complaint, they were actually having a conversation in a group, like in person, and they said, we're under surveillance. We got to switch from one secret text messaging program to another one, and the confidential informant was in the group having a conversation with them. So they were trying to transfer protocols to switch from Telegram to WhatsApp or whatever it is, and the person who was actually surveilling them was in that group conversation, and they just, okay, sure, yeah, let's move, and they just moved everything over, and the FBI didn't even skip a beat. So a good rule of thumb is take your criminal activity off the internet. It's a good rule. GG. Also, when talking about The Boys, you said the dude got radicalized and shot the superhero. The dude shot a cashier, not a superhero. Also, there are no superheroes in that shot. That's a good point, GG. That's a good point. Yeah. I think I was more caught up in the social commentary than the actual plot points. You could see here what they were trying to do, right? They're trying to say that the news media, they had somebody on the radio every day that this kid would wake up to listening to. It sounded like a Rush Limbaugh, right? And then they would go on to the news, and they had the superhero who was shouting, and she sounded like a Sean Hannity. I think there was even actually a point in there where they said something like, "You're a great American," which is exactly Sean Hannity's line. So the whole thing was this idea that like right-wing media is radicalizing individuals, which I thought was just really, like, come on, guys, are you like, is that what you're saying? And this analogy I think is not exactly on point, but the idea that the media is, I think, elevating the blood pressure of everybody in the room is without debate. I see it from my right-wing friends who say that the Democrats want to destroy America, and I see it from my left-wing friends who say that Trump is Hitler, right? It's the same on both things, and that's really my only point, but thank you for the clarification. We have a super chat that comes from JW. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate that. He's got a question. Says, would Antifa or right-wing equivalent be guilty of planning violent protest or riot based on your observation of the Michigan case? So I want to make sure I can answer that. Based on your observations of the Michigan case. So yeah, so again, you would just go back to the statute, right? And if you applied the statute to a lot of these Antifa organizations, I don't think there's any question at all that it's conspiracy. And so I read the original conspiracy statute. So if you're defrauding the United States, which is a very huge definition, if you're conspiring, if you're entering into an agreement with a group of 2 or more people, and if you're planning actions that are going to do something, that's a conspiracy if it's a criminal activity. It doesn't need to be kidnapping per se, but if you're entering into a conspiracy to firebomb a courthouse, for example, yeah, and then you go and you throw a Molotov cocktail, 100%. 100% that is a violation of federal law. But there are no arrests being made in those cases. Why is that? Local and state governments are really letting the protesters by. The federal Department of Justice is also not doing anything. And I think there's a political reason for both of those things. The state governments, in my mind, are failing to arrest those individuals in large part because it's a political thing, right? They don't want to be seen as being hard on BLM. They want to be promoting criminal justice reform. They want to be very woke. That's why these protests are taking place, I think, in Seattle, in Portland and different areas, in typically liberal cities. And if the Department of Justice, if Donald Trump comes in, many people are shouting at him to say, hey, you got to come in and crack the hand of the federal government, of the federal Justice Department, and stop these protests. Well, is that the right answer also? Is that the right way to approach this? Because now you've got the big heavy hand of the federal government coming down into your local communities. Do we want that? Not really, right? And so I think for sure that a lot of those people, a lot of these protests, a lot of the Antifa organizers burning down buildings and throwing Molotovs, yeah, that's conspiracy. It's conspiracy to firebomb, but they're getting a pass for some reason. It's very interesting. But the right-wing groups are getting a lot of focus, right? Remember when Chris Wallace asked Donald Trump to disavow the Proud Boys, many of us, myself included in the audience, were going, who the hell are the Proud Boys? I never heard of them. I don't know who those people are. But I've been seeing Antifa every day on the news burning buildings down and throwing Molotovs at courthouses. So why didn't he ask Joe Biden about those people? Well, it's because the standard's a little bit different, right? The people who ask the questions, they have a political agenda and they want to single out the right-wing individuals. And in this case, in the Whitmer case, I think absolutely, right? This was the right thing for the federal government to do, the right thing for the Department of Justice to do. I think you could also make the argument that it's the right thing for them to do, to go in and just kind of swoop up these Antifa individuals who are wrecking cities. But for some reason, the Department of Justice is just not pursuing that. I think under the law, under the clear language of the statute, if we want to just read the text of it, it's pretty clear that I think that they're all guilty of conspiracy as well as many other crimes, but they're just not being prosecuted for it. So it's a good question, and thank you for the super chat. RES Illusion says federal government does not exist to enforce local laws, but it is empowered to handle contentious exercise of the enumerated rights it is scripted to protect and defend. Firestarter says this is exactly why we need vigilantes. Brad Claxton. Bill Barr said people are getting arrested without people realizing it in states that let federal agents come in. Do you think that's actually happening? I saw some of that. I saw some of these stories, or I would see the videos posted on Twitter of these vans just kind of swooping up and picking people up and taking them off. And I saw a lot of my defense attorney friends saying, well, this is the federal government swooping people up and taking them off to concentration camps, and they're all rounding people up and all this stuff. And I didn't watch it that way. So in other words, I don't think that the federal agents are rounding people up in this manner. I don't think that the vans are going in and swooping up protesters. That's not how I watched the video. Now, I've not seen any evidence of that. I've not seen any evidence that these people are getting rounded up. They're getting charged or indicted or held in custody and later released. I've seen a lot of local police cite and release. I've seen a lot of the Hollywood, there's all these funds and different media people who are setting up these funds to help bail people out. But I haven't seen any of that on behalf of the federal government. I just haven't seen that come through. If I had, then I'd be happy to see that. Or if you've seen it, send that over to me. But what I was seeing that as is more of these vans were pulling out. They were extracting some of their own people. So it seemed to me like some of these federal agents may have had individuals like we see in this Whitmer case. We had undercover people, we have confidential human sources, we have people who are sort of in these mobs of people who are being extracted by the federal agents. So when those vans would swoop up, they'd open the doors, they'd just swoop somebody in. We as lay people would look back and say, they just arrested a peaceful protester. I don't think so. I think those were probably undercover agents who they were swooping back in. They were pulling them out, and they were doing it under the guise of an arrest. But that's just pure speculation. I don't have any evidence of that other than to say, well, we know that they had four undercover informants in the Whitmer plot. So why wouldn't they have anybody else in Antifa? And if Antifa is coordinating a plot to capture a governor or to kill the president or something like that, I would imagine that they would act on those, and they would have plenty of evidence, just like they did in the Whitmer case. What's up, Zulu? Zulu comes in with the super chat. Good to see you, my friend. If Antifa riots, does that pretty much give everyone else carte blanche to do illegal things with impunity? I'm no lawyer, so just curious. So no, no, it's a great question, and I understand why you're asking that. It's because, like, practically, if the government is not going to enforce the laws against Antifa, well, why are they going to enforce it against anybody else? I mean, I understand the point of the question, but the law is really what the law is. And if Antifa's going out and throwing Molotovs, and you want to go out and throw a Molotov, I'm going to guess that you're going to get arrested for that, right? In Arizona, Antifa could be arresting in Portland, but here locally, things are pretty calm. And so just because that the rules aren't getting applied to Antifa somewhere else doesn't mean that you have carte blanche to go out and do what you want to do. So in other words, we are not yet on the Purge. Remember that movie? I never actually saw the movie, but I just saw all the trailers of it. It looks interesting. I don't think that we're there yet, but there are some good arguments to be made there, right? And we're starting to see this kind of trickle through some of the litigation. We're not seeing it just yet in the criminal context, but remember the other case that we talked about with Amy Coney Barrett and Zulu. I know you're around all the time. I appreciate you being here, and so we've talked about this one, so I'm just going to ping it for you. But the one where we were talking about specifically the lockdown orders, I think it was with Whitmer actually, where the Republican Party, it was in the context of Amy Coney Barrett. That's what it was. We were talking about the lockdown order and whether or not they could lock down and carve out an exclusion for the religious, right? So the lockdown orders came through. They carved out an exclusion for the religious people. You can still go to church. The Republican Party filed a lawsuit and said, okay, political speech is the same type of speech. It's protected just like religion is protected. They're both within the bounds of the First Amendment. So we want an exclusion too. Went up to the courts. The courts came back and said, nope, you don't get an exclusion. And Amy Coney Barrett sided with the majority on that and said, yep, no exclusion for you. Religion is different than political assembly, and so you don't get that exception. But what we're seeing here is it's this conversation about the equal protection of the laws. The Republican Party in that lawsuit, their concept was you're favoring one class over another. You're favoring the religious over the political, which is not okay, right? Under the 14th Amendment, which has been incorporated down into the states, it's the equal protection of the laws. We all get the same justice system, supposedly. We all should be treated the same way. And so you can't say that we're only going to criminalize this type of behavior for black people, but we're going to make it legal for white people. That's not equal protection. You can't pass a law that is unequally applied. So it's the same concept. The Republicans were saying, well, you can't do that with the religious. You can't do that with the political. And so now what your question is, it's sort of trickling down. We're talking about those bigger, high constitutional issues, but what if the local police department is not enforcing the law in certain areas? What if certain people are getting away with certain crimes and other people are not? Is that unequal protection of the law? I think there's a very good argument that it is. And we may see more of that. We may see a business owner, say in Portland, who is sick to death of his business getting burned down or having protesters all over the place. It's bad for business. It's bad for property values. It's not good. And he must be wondering, well, why is my state making sure that this area is a free-for-all war zone, essentially, but over there, a zip code away, things are good and peaceful? That's not equal protection. We pay the same taxes. We pay the same, we do the same things. We should have the same protection under the law. And if that's not the case, why not? So we may see some more of those challenges, but a lot of this is going to come down to discretionary enforcement. If the police department, if the local sheriffs, if the local chief of police, if the local city councils don't want their police enforcing these protests and things, then this is just not going to happen. But it's a good question and an interesting thought. So thank you, Zulu. All right, so let's keep on going. Arizona, about to get beat by Andy Dalton, says Momo Paintballs. Okay, we have Dale Power, says Firestarter, in the system, the unborn don't have a presence, so they don't count for equal protection. That could be changed, but hasn't been. Mark Taylor, listening to men talk about abortions always makes me LOL. RES Illusions, getting back over to Zulu Zite. Let's see. Momo Paintball says, go Cowboys, beat the Cardinals. I grew up as a Cowboys fan back during the Aikman and the Emmitt Smith era. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin. I was a young boy back then. And my whole life I've been living in Arizona, and the Cardinals have just been terrible. So there was a period of don't tell anybody. There was a period of time when I was a huge Cowboys fan. But I don't watch a whole lot of sports anymore. All right, let's see. This comes from JW. Can you use lack of enforcement, riots, etc., as a partial defense in future case if you are arrested? I don't think that would work at all. You could always, make that argument that it's equal protection, but that's not going to go anywhere. I mean, basically, the police have a lot of discretion. Prosecutors have a lot of discretion. It's built into our system of justice. So the police could easily pull over one person for speeding going 11 over and not write that person a ticket, and write the next person also going 11 over a ticket. Why is that? Well, they have some discretion. Maybe the first person admitted it. Maybe the first person said, I'm sorry. The second person said, I'm not sorry. You're a jerk. Why'd you pull me over? I'm late for work. So that person gets a ticket. So the officer has that discretion. Prosecutors have that discretion. They can look at a probable cause statement and decide whether to file something or not. So it just depends. But just because somebody else didn't get charged for something, it doesn't mean that they have to be bound by that prior decision. They can have another justification for charging you or for not charging you. But it's a good question. Never trust a lawyer. Momo, look up the terms. Pro football, sports entertainment. It's going to make guys like you cry. Eric Twog says, I refuse to watch the NFL. It's too political. I haven't been watching sports in a long, long time. Gigi says, at R&R, to be fair, I'm pretty sure the liberal cities are just afraid that prosecuting Antifa would cause bigger riots and hence are left to just ignoring them. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that point. To me, it feels like they're more in alignment with their message. So Antifa to me has always come off as this anti-capitalist, pro-socialist, anti-big business, anti-money type of an organization. And I think a lot of these sort of liberal cities are more in alignment with that, with this idea of big government, more social services. So I think they're just they're not on the same boat, but they're rowing the same direction. And that's why I think the hand has been a little lighter in some of those jurisdictions. By the way, the TWOG means my second Google account. We, the people, are the jury, and as such, we are the deciders, not the political appointees, often called the ASA or the ADA. That comes from RAS Illusion. Dale Power says, if charging Antifa was a danger, then the state shouldn't be prosecuting others either. Brad Claxton says, have you watched the confession tapes on Netflix? The answer is no. I have not watched the confession tapes. If it's about confessing, then the answer is don't do that. That's how I feel about it. Not a good idea to talk to the police almost under any circumstances. Not a good idea. But I will watch those. I'll actually add that to my list. I'll write that down. All right. Any other questions coming in? All right. R&R. Is Kyle coming out anytime soon? That comes from Emilio. And I think the answer on that is no. I don't think he's getting out anytime soon. So I know that he had a deadline. There was a deadline last Friday. I think it was on the 15th for the government to respond to the writ for a petition of habeas corpus. And I don't know if they responded or what's in the substance of that response, but I do want to give an update on Kyle Rittenhouse because it has been, I think, about a month since the last time. Now I have this structure for how we manage our cases that we monitor on this channel. I'll probably share that with you guys here probably this week. I want to kind of I want to pretty it up a little bit, and then I'll share it with you, and I'll get your feedback on it. But yeah, we will have a Kyle Rittenhouse update. He is still in Illinois, and I do not think that he's going to beat the extradition hearing or beat that motion. In other words, the writ is going to be unsuccessful. He is going to be transported back to Wisconsin. There, I think he actually, to many people's surprise, I actually think he has a better chance of getting out in Wisconsin, which is why one of my positions on this thing was, why are his defense attorneys fighting this extradition so hard? Because we have precedents in another case. Her name was Crystal. We covered it on this channel, but she is also accused of murder. She shot somebody allegedly in the head and burned the house down, and she is out of custody on bail, only $400,000. So Kyle Rittenhouse, his bond was originally set at $2 million. If he gets transferred back over to Wisconsin, I think his bond could actually justifiably be reduced from $2 million down to $400,000. I think at $400,000, I think he could probably raise that money through his defense fund if his other attorneys haven't used all of that money or done something they shouldn't have done with it, there's probably enough money out there to raise $400,000 for Kyle instead of the $2 million, at which point he could probably get out of custody just like Crystal was. All right, so Firestarter says, how can they keep Kyle in prison so long over self-defense? Isn't that illegal? Shouldn't he be out in 24 to 48 hours max? So it's a great question. So what they did in Kyle's case is, typically you need to see a judge within 24 to 48 hours. It sort of depends on the specifics, and there's a lot of details that go into that. But you're right. They need to see a judge. When Kyle saw the judge said, you're basically non-extraditable because of the facts of your case. So under Illinois law, we covered it on this channel, but there are certain segments of crimes that you just cannot be released for. You cannot be released out of custody. You're called non-bondable. I said non-extraditable. What I meant was non-bondable. In other words, you cannot get out of custody. So in Arizona, one of those offenses is a sexual assault crime, right? Which is rape. If you rape somebody, you don't get out of custody. You can see a judge. You can request a hearing. It's called a Simpson hearing here. It's basically a due process hearing. It's a preliminary hearing. So you can go in and say, here's why we don't think there's enough probable cause. And you can fight for somebody to get out of custody in that way. But murder is another one of those charges. If you murder somebody, they're not going to let you out. You're too much of a danger to society. But there are things you can do, like Kyle's attorneys are doing, filing the petition for habeas corpus, and they're trying to they're trying to do some things in Illinois that I think are going to be unsuccessful, but under the law, there's a certain category of offenses you just don't get out. But as we've talked about here, there is a different case that we covered where Crystal, I think her name was Geyser or something like that. I can look back in the archives, but she got out at $400,000. So her bond was originally set at $1 million. They got it reduced down to $400,000, and she's out of custody now. So I think that may be in Kyle's future. It's a good question, though. All right. Just remember, Derek Chauvin is out on bail and he can travel, and Rittenhouse is in jail. Yeah, I know. A lot of these cops are out of custody. How can Kyle be held accountable for those crimes when he didn't commit them, since there's clearly no probable cause for anything other than self-defense-based homicide? So it's again, another great question. So Firestarter's, he's asking some good questions. So self-defense is an affirmative defense, which means you have to acknowledge that you actually shot and killed somebody, right? So Kyle's defense, if he's going to be claiming self-defense, is he's going to say, yep, I pulled the gun, I shot them, I shot all of them, I did it, they're dead. Okay, I intended to do it and I did it, and now they're dead. But my affirmative defense is that I was acting out of self-defense. They were attacking me. I have a presumption. I was fleeing. And we've covered a lot of this at length in previous videos. We can do a refresher on this, but essentially it's saying that he needs to go into a trial and he needs to present that evidence in the affirmative. So in a normal criminal case, the government has to meet the burden of proof. You've heard they have to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high standard. So ordinarily, they have to prove it. Now, what Kyle needs to do is he needs to prove his self-defense. So he needs to affirmatively prove it. Rather than the burden being on the government, the burden is on Kyle's team. Once he can show that, under Wisconsin law, if he gets moved over to Wisconsin, that it was an affirmative defense, then the burden will flip back over to the prosecutor. So in other words, Kyle's team has some work to do, and that needs to take place in the criminal process. And so that's a separate part. He can still get out of custody if he can secure a bond. If he can secure the bond, drop it from $2 million to $400,000, post the bond, then he can be out of custody, just like Chauvin and just like some of these other cops. But he's got to win that battle. And currently, his attorneys have kept him in Illinois, and they've filed continuances, multiple continuances on this petition for habeas and all sorts of stuff, which is just going to keep him in custody and kind of prolong the process, in my mind. So there is a possibility that he gets out, but for the time being, it's not looking like that. Gigi says, how is COVID affecting your line of work? COVID was a big hit on our line of work, no question about it. And, it was something that sort of impacted things across the board. Certainly people were getting in a lot less trouble initially, right? People aren't going to bars. They're not going to sporting events. They're not going to conventions. Arizona has, a lot of spring training for baseball and all that stuff. And so normally right around February, March, April, May, we have a lot of people funneling in from all over the country into Arizona, and that just didn't happen. So this huge surplus of people who usually come out and get into a little trouble, that didn't happen. And that impacted our business, right? Obviously, just like it impacted a lot of other businesses, right? The hotels are hurt. Everything's hurt, right? The criminal law firms are no different than any other business. Every single business is getting decimated over this type of stuff. And so, that's fine. We made do. We put a plan in place. We had a 90-day plan we did here at the firm to work on a lot of projects and do some great things. And fortunately, we were financially solvent, so we didn't have any real issues there. We didn't have to, lay anybody off or reduce work week or anything like that. But it hurt the business. It hurt the courts. The courts were all closed down. We had courts that were closed for basically 3 months, and so all of those cases were just getting piled up. Nothing was getting processed, so the courts are super backlogged. It's hard for our clients. Our clients, many people have these cases that are sort of just in hiatus mode, right? These people have a lot of stress. They have a lot of anxiety over what's going on in their life, and they want to get these cases resolved quickly, but they can't. The courts are closed. Nobody's working. The judges are home. The prosecutors aren't doing anything. So a lot of people are just kind of sitting on their hands, and that's on top of the additional strife and just agony that people are experiencing anyways, right? All the stress. We got an election coming up. People are quarantined at home. People are losing their jobs. People are drinking more. People are getting fired and let go. I mean, it has not been good. We've seen a lot of increase in domestic violence calls, and we've seen a lot of basically an increase in just substance abuse just across the board, right? So initially, a lot of the crimes were down, but now we're seeing an uptick in some of the more substance-related crimes, more drug crimes, more domestic violence crimes, more DUIs, because people are self-medicating in lieu of the lockdown. So it's been an interesting ride, and we're still seeing the effects of it because the courts are now opening back up, and now we're having these debates about how to do a trial. How do you do a trial in front of a jury with a mask on? Almost impossible in my mind, right? A lot of what you do when you're in court is you're orating, you're talking. You need to enunciate. People need to see your face because they need to see those micro expressions. They need to see if you're honest or not. You need to see if the cop's being honest or not. You need to watch that. You need to watch, how things are going. It's a very fast-paced, very people-oriented area of law. We don't do contract law where I could just sit in a closet and write a contract, right? We're in court. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with prosecutors, dealing with clerks, dealing with jurors, dealing with judges, dealing with police. And so if everybody's, socially distanced and with masks on and stuff like that, it's hard to do what we do. But there has been some benefits also, right? Some of these court hearings take place on Zoom now, so you don't have to put a suit and tie on and drive down to court and wait around for a bunch of, for an hour in order for your case to be called. You just kind of hang out on Zoom. So there's some benefits there as well. But it has been an interesting ride. Quite frankly, I don't think it's any different really than any other business. A lot of businesses, a lot of, small businesses in particular, I think are facing a lot of difficulties in light of these lockdowns, which is why I've been fairly critical of that. Okay, R&R. A very interesting issue coming to pass shortly in Illinois. The medical Mary Jane card takes a background check to get, even though recreational is legal here also. It's the same for our ID card, your FOID card. That's interesting. Yeah, medical marijuana is on the ballot here in Arizona. No, recreational is on the ballot. We already have medical, but recreational is coming up. But I don't think we have a background component to that. Gigi says, what do you think about starting your own news blog since you do most of the research anyways? It's a good question, Gigi. We own watchingthewatchers.tv. Currently, it forwards right over to this channel. But I was thinking about actually turning that into a website because there are stories and there are links and things that we don't have time to make a full video on, but that I do think would be pertinent to post somewhere. So I'm trying to figure all of that out. I know I don't use the community tab on YouTube at all. I know I need to start doing that. I've got the idea of starting a Discord channel because I've got other projects and I think it'd be kind of cool to centralize a big, a communication hub for these issues. We can start different channels for Rittenhouse or Taylor or whatever, whatever kind of the hot issues are, can start different channels for that. So I'm just sort of trying to figure it all out. I love this conversation. I love this stuff, but I'm trying to figure out what the best way to keep it all organized is in a way that of course that you want to use. So I appreciate the thoughts and the feedback. Anarcho tyranny in the cities. How in the hell can the state prosecute him based on the false premises, especially given the publicly available physical and video evidence, which is what Wisconsin is doing? Yeah, so Firestarter is going back to Kyle Rittenhouse. And again, the decision to prosecute just goes up to the prosecuting attorney. Yeah, they just decide. They sign off on a probable cause statement. I read the probable cause statement in the Rittenhouse case here. I agree. I think it's written poorly. I think it's written for the defense. Every single paragraph in there, I think, justifies a self-defense argument. I think it was written to support a self-defense argument, but the prosecutor still filed it and they're still charging it. So until that prosecutor, Mike Gravely, out of Wisconsin, until he decides that he wants to drop the charges, which I don't think will ever happen, he has the right to do so. And I think it will continue to move forward. Anyone got any actual good news where some positive things have occurred in our legal system? So JW. So the best thing that I've seen happen in our legal system is in the video that I just released last week about Governor Mark Grisanti. He got the scolding of the lifetime by an officer. It was so great. I was laughing so hard when I was watching that. Now, that being said, I don't want to be mean to Mark Grisanti. I don't want to be, kind of a jerk about it. But he got a scolding he got a scolding, and it was absolutely necessary. Now, he didn't get charged with the crime, so he escaped all of the liability associated with that, which is a huge problem. But he did get a good scolding, a good talking to. It was a feel-good video. That was the last thing that we covered on this channel. So take a look at that video. I think I actually put the actual time code link in there, so you can just go right to it. Firestarter, how can prosecutors lob false charges? Well, they do it. They do. They don't think that they're false is the answer to that. They think that there's probable cause there, and it's a very low standard. So I think the issue that you're having, seeing the difference, is that probable cause is all that's needed to charge somebody. It's a very low standard. Let me see if I can show you this. Burden of proof standards. So let's see if we can just Google burden of proof standards, and I can sort of show you what the different standards look like. All right, so you can pick any one of these, and you'll see sort of this staircase that looks like this. So let me turn that chat off real quick. All right, see, this is the staircase. So reasonable suspicion. This is the amount of evidence that an officer needs to frisk somebody, right? It's it. It's not much. Just reasonable suspicion. Like, it's pretty reasonable that you look suspicious. Probable cause, this is what is needed to arrest somebody. So it's very low. Look how low this is on the chart. In order to convict somebody of a crime, it's evidence beyond any doubt based on a reason. If you have any doubt that's based in reason about whether a person's guilty or not, then that person's not guilty. They have to prove it's beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to step up on top of this step here, and that is what makes it guilty. So what you're talking about here in Kyle Rittenhouse's case is you're thinking that they should basically be at this standard. They're not. They're down here at this standard. Very low. That's it. That's all they need to show. And they have shown that. I mean, quite frankly, they have. They showed that he shot and killed somebody, and he intended to do it. And according to the rules, that's just how our system works. So Kyle Rittenhouse can be charged and can be held in custody for that. All right. Never Trust a Lawyer says prosecutors are made out of Teflon. All right, we have Lydia Sinclair, unhappy with Kyle Rittenhouse's attorneys. Gigi says that the Commerce Clause is effing BS, which is true. Probable cause is a low standard unless you're a cop in Louisville. The freaking Commerce Clause, yeah. Zulu Zite. Jeremy Skaggs says, do you know if AZ has figured out a way to protect marijuana smokers from unreasonable arrest or public from smokers who drive? The lack of protection for both in the law is why it didn't pass last. So I have not actually read the full bill yet, the one that's on the ballot. I haven't read it yet. I'm not real sure if there are any protections either way. But it's a good issue. The marijuana stuff is going to be an issue for a long time coming. The reason being is because it's really hard to measure and hard to test. Remember, with alcohol, they have a standard. It's your blood alcohol content. Let's flip this chat back on. They have the blood alcohol content, your BAC, and they can just give you a breath test. They can draw blood and they can analyze. They can say, all right, well, this person has a 0.01 or 0.08 or 0.1 or 0.125, and they can know what your BAC is, and then they can correlate that with your level of impairment. There's scientific studies that show that if you're at a or above a 0.08, it's likely that you're going to experience, cognitive decline, a decline in motor functions, and all of the different things that are associated with drinking. But they can't make that same correlation with marijuana because it's too variable. In other words, basically everybody, if you're at a 0.08, you're going to have some impaired motor function. Basically everybody with alcohol, or at least that's what the studies show. And so we create this presumption that if you're at that limit, then you're driving under the influence. We don't have to prove that, but that doesn't exist for marijuana. It's much more variable. They can't say that if you're at 5 nanograms per milliliter, which is the way they measure these things, or 1 nanogram per milliliter, or 15 nanograms per milliliter of blood, they can't correlate that with impairment. So somebody who's never smoked marijuana may be really impaired from a tiny, small amount of marijuana. On the other hand, you may have a medical user, somebody who smokes all day, every day. They may be at 15 nanograms per milliliter and be fine, can do cartwheels, can perform everything. They're just operating at a normal baseline. So unlike DUIs, where they can just say, if you're at this limit, you're illegal. They can't do that with marijuana. And the other issue that they have is the testing. So with alcohol, it's a pretty simple test. You can blow into an intoxilizer. They have portable breath tests. They can do a blood draw, and they run big batches of blood. With marijuana, it's a little bit of a different process. They're testing for a number of different drugs. The drugs is different than alcohol. It's a different testing mechanism, and it's a much more involved process because now they have to, first of all, they have to quantify, or they have to qualify what's in the blood. So they have to say, okay, now we're talking about drugs. Is it marijuana? Is it cocaine? Is it meth? Is it amphetamines? Is it any of the other drugs? There's a million of them. So they have to qualify it. What is it? Then they have to quantify it. Okay, now that we know what's in there, how much is in there? And then once they know how much is in there, then they have to connect it to impairment, which they can't do in the same way as alcohol. So a lot more defenses with marijuana, and it's going to be very curious what happens, at least in Arizona, and in particular with our prosecuting agencies, because there are a lot of prosecutors out there who are vehemently opposed to marijuana in any form, and they're charging crimes based on the very, very low threshold. For a long time, they were even charging you for marijuana crimes in Arizona, even on the inactive metabolite, not even active THC. Inactive THC was enough. So we'll see what happens with it, but we'll continue to follow that one along also. Mark Taylor. Rob, do you think QAnon is running the Pizzagate playbook with the Hunter Biden story? So there is a lot in that question. QAnon is running the Pizzagate playbook. So QAnon, so I'm not familiar with much of that. I heard of the Pizzagate thing, but I don't know much about it. I watched one of those conspiracy documentaries on YouTube. I love those movies. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but I just don't know how much of it is true. So I don't know what the Pizzagate playbook would be. We covered Hunter Biden. We covered that stuff on, I think this was last week on this channel. And we're starting to see a little bit more smoke and some more documents come out, but I haven't taken a deep dive on it this week because I was looking at the Whitmer stuff for today. And Faith's gone, so she didn't help with my show prep today. I'm worried about illegal drivers crashing into me with no insurance than weed smokers. Valid concern. Hunter is guilty without a doubt. R&R, when are taxes coming out? My taxes or Trump's taxes? I think responsibility is actually easier to assign when there isn't the administrative state in place. Example, Facebook and Twitter want to be regulated. So when they pull things like this week, they can just blame the regulations. Yeah, so a very interesting point from RAS Illusion. And so I think this is sort of the standard with a lot of these big tech companies, because think about what regulations do. Regulations really make it difficult for new entities to enter into the marketplace. If things are highly regulated, it's difficult to get into it because you have to comply with all the regulations. Typically, it's expensive. You need this insurance, you need this license, you need these providers, you need all this stuff. So it costs a lot, right? Like think about if you were just a master craftsman, right? You can build anything, right? You know how to do electrical, plumbing, drywall, framing, roofing. You know how to do it all. And you want to just go buy a house or buy a piece of property and build a house on it. Well, you could do it, right? You could just go to the hardware store, buy everything you need, and build a house. It doesn't work that way, right? You got to go get a state permit. You got to get it zoned. You got to go have inspectors come. The studs have to be so far apart. The electrical outlets all have to be within code. You got to comply with the ADA if you're going to have other people on it. You've got taxes and regulations, and you got to get the water hooked up, and you got to get permits for everything. Regulation makes it really difficult to do things that you want to do. So now that these companies are so huge, Facebook is huge, Twitter is huge, Amazon is huge. What do they want? Regulation. Sure. Why? Because they're already on top. If you start to regulate these other entities, then maybe the next Google doesn't come along. They don't pop up anymore. And so, in my mind, what I see from Amazon is they've got this behemoth, and I love Amazon, right? I use it for everything. So I'm not bad-mouthing them. But what we're talking about here is, why would they be disappointed with other regulations? They can comply with the regulations. They can comply with everything. They've got teams of lawyers. They've got teams of marketing. They've got pockets that are, billions and trillions of dollars deep. So what do they care about regulations? They don't. But if somebody wants to form a startup, then they got to think about all those regulations, and they have to think about, the investment and how much that costs. And the barrier to entry is a lot higher. So when you're on your way to the top, you don't want any regulations. But when you reach the top, sure, you want all the regulations in the world because it keeps you on top. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And I think people are getting pretty tired of it. Does it look bad, the Biden lawyer asking for the laptop back? Yeah, Brad, it's a great question. So I heard that statement from Rudy Giuliani. He did a really interesting interview with Steven Crowder, and he did another one with, I think, Real Clear Politics. I watched a couple things from him, and I was trying to get a good read on what does he really have there? And he said something like the lawyer asked for the email back. And then I actually read the email, or asked for the hard drive back. Then I actually read the email from the lawyer to the repair store owner, Lee Mack, or whatever his name is. And I didn't see anything in there asking for the hard drive back, which is not unusual, right? So on Twitter, people were saying, well, he didn't even ask for the drive back. All he was saying is, hey, thanks for the conversation. And if you read the text, it is that. It's him saying, hey, thanks for the conversation. Appreciate talking to you, essentially. I'm sending this email to reference what we discussed. End of email. And so on Twitter, everybody was saying, well, he didn't even mention the laptop, so he wasn't asking for it back. And they read that as Rudy Giuliani was a liar, and he was making up this thing. And I thought, no, that's not true at all. Of course, a lawyer wouldn't actually put the meat of the request in an email. He would make a phone call and say, hey, I need that laptop back. I'm in deep doo-doo. Can you send that to me? And the guy says, no, we're not going to send it. Or he says to the attorney, why don't you send me a confirmation email so I know you are who you say you are? Then that attorney sends an email back over, and it's very generic, doesn't answer anything, doesn't question anything. So that's kind of how you do business, right? Lawyers know what to put into an email and not put into an email, and you want to be as generic as possible. So I did think that the fact that he reached out was sort of confirming that there was a relationship there. He reached out to this person and said something. So there was, there's some connection there, but I don't really think it's the smoking gun either way. I would like to see more confirmations from third parties. I would like to see the email headers, because then I think you could verify with the server operators whether there are logs of these emails actually being transmitted around to different places. But I think it's hard to deny that what we see on there is troubling, and there's so many different allegations that it's hard to deny that there's probably some veracity to them. I think it's going to come out that this stuff is going to be more truer than we think. All right, Gigi says, what do you think about billionaires Trump getting millions in refunds? Should we put a limit on how much aid can a person get from the government? So that's a good question. So I'm not real sure what you're meaning by refunds. I mean, I am a low tax proponent across the board. I think we sort of misconstrue this concept of a refund. People think that they're getting a refund from the government, but that's your money. They're giving you some of your money back, and that's how I think it should be. I'm not a fan of taxes at all. I think taxes are very destructive. across the board. So yeah, if big companies are reinvesting into their growth and they're reinvesting into the economy and they're hiring people and they're growing and creating value and they're not paying taxes because they're reinvesting back into their company, that's how it's supposed to work. So I support that. I support low taxes. All right. You have too much faith in email server companies not to erase data. That comes from Mill2093. I think that's probably true. Yeah, a refund merely means you overpaid. Yeah, it's your money. All right, just checking. Did you cover the arrest of the guy that shot the gun in the air during the Rittenhouse situation? That's Manuel in Austin. No, we haven't yet. So I've got sort of a number of different articles that are queued up for a Rittenhouse update. He is in that. Yeah. And so he was the guy, we did cover that in the video. He fired the gun off to the left in the frame of that angle where Kyle and Rosenbaum are running around the back. He's over off on this side. And yeah, we see that. We freeze framed it and we saw him fire directly into the air, which in my mind supported the self-defense claim, right? Kyle is running from people who are chasing and shooting at him. How is that not self-defense? It is in the queue. It's in the hopper. So I will cover that. All right. No one is getting jobs from people on welfare. That is true. All right, everybody. Well, listen, we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you so much for being here. We had a lot of people on today, a lot of good turnout, and I appreciate you being here. We'll come back tomorrow. We're going to be here live every day this week. So 4 p.m., same time, same place, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you're on the East Coast, thanks for being here. As a quick reminder, if you know anybody who needs help with a criminal case in the state of Arizona, that's what we do. We have a whole team of people here who are dedicated to that. That's our day job. And so we would love if you would send them our way. We offer free case evaluations. I'll give them a copy of my book if they come in and see us. We'll mail them one. If not, it's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. Written by yours truly right there. You can check that out on Amazon if you want as well. One more quick reminder to subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. We do this show often, and I also will release separate videos doing deeper dives on other areas that are interesting, other areas of the criminal justice world. So we appreciate you being here, and if you can, share this show. Send it to somebody else. Invite them on to be a part of the live chat. A lot of the time, the videos that we cover here talk about a lot of difficult things, right? We talk about people dying. We talk about big problems with police. We talk about some pretty, gruesome things like a plot to arrest and kill the governor of a sitting state. So what happens is, unfortunately, some of our videos get age restricted and they stop getting, recommended. They don't show up in the watch next. And so it's kind of difficult to spread the word. So it would be very helpful if you just invited somebody to come, watch the show tomorrow. I'd love that. But if not, just want you here. So thanks so much for being here. Have an awesome night. Thanks for joining in the chat and keeping it lively, and have yourselves a wonderful night.